want us to talk, yeah.
I know. Yeah. All right, guys. So the video dropped there. But we got him back up. All right. So the enemy's trying to crush us, but we will prevail. Um,
Hmm.
so, the last thing you said was Neo. You were talking about. You're getting ready to talk about. You were just finished talking about October 7th. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the unfortunate massacre that happened
Hmm.
because of Hamas.
Yeah. And so, yeah, as I was seeing the images and videos coming up, I was just filled with rage and hate, and I was like, how can they do this? How can this happen? Um, and I know some people will try and either, well, excuse October 7th, or if they can't, they'll just go back to, well, it started before October 7th. Um, But if you go back in time to 1948 when Israel established itself, you still had all the Arabs rose up and tried to attack Israel because they didn't want the Jews living there. And you say, well, it's just because they declared themselves independent, well, that was an aggressive act. But even before, and there was a couple of like large, like Arab revolts and aggressions toward Jews who lived in what was the colony of Palestine that was under the British mandate. Um, so there was never really a time where there was like really long-standing peace, and all of a sudden Israel came in and the Zionists, and all of a sudden that now there's animosity. There was always animosity towards the Jews over there. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, whose name I escapes me, but he was recognized by Adolf Hitler as a basically honorary Aryan uh,
Mm.
because of his views, and they had kind of worked together on some stuff. So the idea that somehow Zionists came in and now all of a sudden there's animosity and they pushed Arabs out, that was completely false. Um, so I would say the big thing for Christian is if you are going to take a stand on that is outside of the faith, just take a look at the history and don't just read one side, read the actual history of
Mm.
basically who keeps starting the aggression. Um, but as far as the faith part, we should be supporting Israel, and it doesn't necessarily mean agreeing with everything the Israeli government does, right? Because we are first citizens of the kingdom of heaven and not
Mhm.
any other country in the world. Um, so I think, if you want, there's room to criticize as long as it's not a matter of like, a different center that you're holding on, because a lot of people will hold a different center to Israel. Um, if Hamas did what they did here in the U.S., what they did in Israel, the U.S. would be a full-scale war almost immediately, and
Mm.
not many Americans would say that it's wrong. Um, so I think the correct response is yes, support Israel. Especially when it prevails against Hamas. But you also don't want to fall into the trap of trying to demonize and hate Palestinians.
Mm.
They are God's people too, as far as like God created all of them. They're made in the image of God, rather.
Mm.
And we should be loving everybody. We should be praying for everybody, especially our enemies. One thing that I have had a hard time doing is praying for the Palestinian terrorists, that is Hamas, but it's something that we should do. So I had to pray to God to give me the heart to pray for them, and ask my friends to pray for that as well. And it didn't take as long as I thought it did. As soon as I started praying, basically within a week, all of a sudden I find myself in a position where I could earnestly pray for even the terrorists. But at the end of the day, we want to pray for the salvation of all of Israel and Palestine.
Mhm.
So we want all of them to come to Messiah.
Mm.
Now, from a perspective of Hamas, they're agents of the enemy, and they want to destroy Israel, and they hate God. So Hamas as an organization should absolutely be crushed, and all organizations like that. But again, we should pray for the salvation of all Israelis and all Palestinians, and
Mm.
that's the same way with people all over the world. Um, I think also, as sometimes people will demonize Israelis because they'll see a video of basically Israelis persecuting Christians or Messianic believers. Um, but that is something that's going to happen all over the world. And again, this is a matter of, pray for your enemies, because we do want the salvation. God doesn't desire anybody to perish, but to be saved. Um, So it's a matter of like above all else, make sure you're praying that they'll come to Messiah, because honestly, it's going to get worse, right? October 7th is part of the birth pangs, so
Mm.
it's going to happen again. It might not be Hamas, it might not be Palestinians, but it'll happen and it'll keep happening until Messiah comes.
Yeah.
Um, only we can only have, as Sam says, we can only have true peace when the Prince of Peace comes. So
Mhm.
until then, um, you're just gonna have more of these things happening. So.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, birth pains. Matthew 24 lays it out, and there's going to be persecution
Mhm.
against not just the Jewish people but believers around the world. Both those who fall under Messianic Judaism and also those who fall under Christianity. But especially those of the Christian faith who support Israel, they're going to get a lot from both sides. Because of there's this um, popular belief that Israel is no longer the chosen people, and if you support that, within Christianity, you're kind of like the black sheep among them, and so you're like we don't want that here,
Mhm.
and so, but for someone who's not really familiar with Messianic Judaism or Christianity, um, in your own experience, in your own words, and what you've kind of observed. Could you kind of explain the differences between the two to kind of help, like, show that, what is Messianic Judaism? What is that versus the traditional Christianity?
Mm. Yes. So what it should be is really not be a whole lot different, right? So the word Christ and Christianity are really just kind of Greekified words for Messianic, right? Messiah and
Mm,
Messianic. So as we think about, well, what is Messianic Judaism? Um, you really don't want to be different in doctrine than what you would know as Christianity necessarily, and of course there's many different beliefs. Um, but the idea is, of course, when Jews come to faith, they don't stop being Jews. Gentiles don't stop being Gentiles,
mm,
just like men don't stop being men and women don't stop being women when
mm.
they come to faith.
Yeah.
So the typically, Jews who are in the faith and are aware of that and care about that will refer to themselves as Messianic Jews. And usually in Gentile churches, they won't have an understanding, so let's just say, they're Christian. And then in Messianic congregations, usually the Gentiles will be Messianic Gentiles, but there's not really a difference in beliefs, or at least there shouldn't be. There are Messianic congregations that have a lot of error in them. Unfortunately, that's kind of the reality of,
Mhm.
even churches have a lot of room for heresies, and you kind of have to be on guard when you go to a new church. And then Messianic congregations have another step of like, well, now there's a Jewish aspect, and
Mm.
you know,
Yeah.
kind of being under the law, thinking that the law saves you, requiring things, or sometimes excluding Gentiles, which is a horrible thing to do.